This is the wood that gave the British a beat down. And while that may sound like the title of an action movie starring Tom Cruise, it's actually the real-life story of an event in history so humiliating for the British, it was almost never talked about again. It's a tale of treachery, deceit, and most of all, bamboo. For over 700 years, the British had been ruling India with a seemingly unassailable military might. But in 1857, their power would be challenged by an unlikely enemy, one that could not only stand up to their rifles, but even break their guns. To understand how this happened, we need to talk about the star of our story, the wood that broke the British, bamboo. Bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants in the world. In fact, some varieties grow faster than you can say bamboo. They're also incredibly tough, yet lightweight and flexible, making them ideal for everything from furniture to musical instruments like the flute. These properties have made bamboo highly prized throughout human history, especially in Asia where it grows wild. But while farmers and craftsmen might cherish bamboo, war is another matter. Historically, bamboo wasn't much used for weapons, largely because of its reputation for being brittle. Swords and spears were usually preferred because they were more reliable. This meant that when the first European powers started venturing into Asia, they didn't really pay much attention to the local weapon of choice. For centuries, the Europeans' primary interest in India was trade, and they weren't interested in fighting wars to acquire more of it. That finally changed during the 18th century, when the British East India Company began exerting more control over the subcontinent. Suddenly, the riches of India were no longer something to be traded for, but rather taken by force. This inevitably led to conflict with the local rulers who were understandably less than thrilled at having their land seized. In 1757, the British won a decisive victory against the Nawab of Bengal, capturing him and his fortune. By the end of the century, they had full control of the region. This victory was thanks in part to the superior firepower of the British. They used muskets which could shoot and reload much faster than the Indian matchlock. But despite the British advantage, the Indians still managed to put up a good fight. They used a variety of tactics, including guerrilla warfare, which took the British by surprise and often caught them off guard. As the 19th century dawned, the British began to take the threat posed by these tactics more seriously. They knew they needed a weapon that could withstand the heat of battle and keep firing. Enter the pattern 1832 Tower musket, the British answer to the Indian challenge. It was designed with a lightweight barrel that was lighter than those previously used by the British, which allowed soldiers to fire more rounds without getting exhausted. The stock was also made of a softer wood, which absorbed more recoil, making it easier to use. But this innovation came at a cost. Because the new rifle was so lightweight, it was much more susceptible to damage from rough handling or moisture. And that's where bamboo came in. See, the British didn't just conquer India, they also annexed its natural resources. This meant that they could use the tough, flexible wood of the bamboo for their new rifles. At first glance, it seemed like a perfect solution. After all, bamboo's flexibility was legendary. Surely a bamboo stock would absorb recoil better than any other wood. But there was one small problem. While bamboo is strong, it's also brittle. When it absorbs enough moisture, it can become very dangerous. In fact, if you leave a bamboo pole soaking overnight in water, then bend it slightly, it will snap like glass. This is what happens when you soak the stock of your gun in water and then try to fire it. Not exactly what you want to happen in the middle of battle. Still, the British pressed on with using bamboo, figuring that they could deal with the occasional breakage. They had no way of knowing that what they were about to unleash would be far worse than that. By the late 1840s, the British were using around 10,000 rifles with bamboo stocks every year. But these numbers are deceptive since many of the rifles were being deployed in areas where bamboo grew wild, so the stocks were easy to replace. Other places weren't so lucky. Then, in 1857, a major conflict erupted in India that would come to be known as the Sepoy Mutiny. What caused the mutiny was a combination of factors, including the poor treatment of the soldiers and controversial changes to their rifles. But whatever the cause, the result was devastating for the British. Within weeks of the start of the rebellion, the British found themselves on the defensive. As they retreated, they desperately tried to rally reinforcements. But even this proved to be difficult because the soldiers stationed elsewhere simply refused to move. Many of them were sympathetic to the cause of the rebels and simply didn't want to fight fellow Indians. Faced with this crisis, the British had no choice but to retreat to the relative safety of their forts. Here, they hoped to hold out until reinforcements arrived. But the situation soon became dire. With the British Army unable to reinforce their positions, the garrisons were forced to scavenge for food and supplies. As time went on, conditions became increasingly desperate, and men were forced to survive on the bare minimum. It wasn't long before disease began to take its toll on the population. Within weeks, the hospitals were filled with the sick and dying, and it became clear that unless help arrived soon, the entire garrison would be wiped out. Fortunately for the British, help did arrive, but it wasn't the kind they were expecting. See, when news of the mutiny reached London, the British government acted quickly. They dispatched troops from other parts of the empire to put down the rebellion. But this was easier said than done. The journey to India took months, and the British were desperate for a quick fix. In the meantime, they turned to their most valuable asset, their spies. Secret agents were sent to India to gather intelligence on the rebels. They infiltrated the enemy ranks and learned all they could about their tactics and strength. Armed with this knowledge, the British were able to mount a more effective defense. They also realized that they needed to change their strategy in order to win the war. They couldn't rely on brute force alone. They needed to be smarter, more cunning. In the end, it was this combination of factors that led to the British victory. But it came at a high cost. Thousands of lives were lost, and the British Empire was shaken to its core. Yet amidst the carnage, there was one bright spot. The British discovered that the wood used for their rifles was not as durable as they had thought. In fact, it was so brittle that it could break under the slightest pressure. This revelation led to a complete overhaul of their military arsenal. The British replaced the bamboo stocks with ones made from other types of wood, which were stronger and more reliable. In the years that followed, the Sepoy Mutiny became a thing of legend. The bravery of the soldiers and the ingenuity of the rebels were celebrated across the subcontinent. And while the British were victorious, they never forgot the valuable lesson they had learned. So the next time you see a bamboo forest, remember it's not just a pretty sight. It's a reminder of the time that the British Army got a taste of their own medicine. And maybe don't trust trees that bend, but don't break. Hey, did you know that there's a secret message in this video? If you reverse the first 10 seconds, you'll see a hidden message telling you to subscribe. But don't worry if you missed it, because here it is again. Please subscribe and join us for more forgotten history.